Just here for the free food, she joked, blending into the crowd like she belonged there. No one questioned her. No.
Ass.
One looked twice. Except the CEO. Something about her didn't fit to calm. Too observant, too careful for someone who claimed to be nothing more than a freeloader. As the truth slowly surfaced, it became clear she wasn't lost. She was hiding in plain sight, escaping a galaxy that would tear her apart if it ever noticed her. This is not a story about wealth or authority. It's a story about how human perception, restraint, and moral courage can uncover secrets even the most advanced civilizations fail to see. When the galaxy relies on systems and surveillance, a human notices what really matters. If you enjoy HFY sci-fi stories, hidden alien twists, corporate intrigue, and moments where humanity defies expectations, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Your support helps bring more unforgettable stories to life. The lunch hall of the company was large, clean, and bright, but it did not feel cold. Every Friday afternoon, long tables were set up, and anyone who was hungry was allowed to come inside. The CEO had started this program quietly years ago, without cameras or speeches. He believed food should not be a reward or a show. It should simply be given. On this particular afternoon, the crowd was larger than usual. People from different walks of life stood in line, some tired, some hopeful, some embarrassed to be there. Volunteers moved calmly, serving warm meals and smiling without asking questions. The CEO stood near the side as he often did, watching silently. He liked to observe rather than lead from the front. That was when he noticed her. She did not rush. She did not look nervous. She stood in line as if she belonged there, hands folded, posture straight. She looked young, maybe in her late teens, wearing simple clothes that were clean but worn. Her face was calm, almost blank, but her eyes moved carefully, taking in the room with quiet attention. When it was her turn, one of the volunteers asked gently, "Would you like anything extra?" The girl shook her head and said, "No, I'm just here for the free food." Her voice was soft, clear, and strangely even. Not shy, not rude, just honest. The words themselves were simple, but something about the way she said them made the CEO pause. Most people added explanations. Some apologized. Some joked. She did neither. She accepted the food, nodded politely, and moved to an empty seat near the corner. The CEO told himself it was nothing. Still, his eyes followed her. She did not eat like someone who was desperate. She took small bites, careful and slow, as if she was measuring the taste. She watched others while she ate, not staring, just noticing. When someone laughed loudly, her head tilted slightly. When a child dropped a spoon, her eyes moved there instantly, before anyone else reacted. She finished every grain of rice. When she was done, she stood, placed the tray neatly where it belonged, and walked out without looking back. That should have been the end of it. The next Friday, she returned. Same calm walk. Same quiet words. Just here for the free food. This time, one of the staff members tried to chat with her. "Do you come from nearby?" She smiled, just a little. Close enough. It was not a lie, but it was not an answer either. Again, she sat alone. Again, she watched more than she spoke. The CEO noticed that she always chose a seat with a clear view of exits. She never stayed after finishing her meal. And always she left before the sun began to lower. Weeks passed. The girl became a familiar figure. Some volunteers thought she was a student. Others assumed she was working but struggling. No one asked too many questions. That was the rule. But the CEO's curiosity grew. One afternoon, he overheard a conversation at a nearby table. Two guests were discussing a news article about climate systems. One of them said something confidently but incorrectly. The girl, sitting nearby, spoke without raising her voice. That model was revised 3 years ago. The older data caused errors in prediction. The table fell silent. One of the men laughed awkwardly. "You're well informed." She nodded once. "I try to be." She returned to her food as if nothing unusual had happened. The CEO felt a strange tightening in his chest. It was not fear. It was recognition of something that did not fit. Later that day, he asked his security team a simple question. "Have you noticed the young girl who comes every Friday?" They nodded. Yes. No record of trouble. She avoids cameras when possible, but not in a suspicious way. More like habit. That answer bothered him more than it should have. Avoiding cameras without effort was not normal. The following Friday, he sat closer. When she entered, she glanced briefly in his direction. Just for a moment, their eyes met. Hers showed no surprise, only awareness, as if she had known he would be watching. She took her food and sat 2 tables away. This time, the CEO noticed something else. She was listening, not just hearing words, but patterns. When someone spoke emotionally, her attention sharpened. When someone lied to impress others, her gaze drifted away, uninterested. She seemed to understand people better than people understood themselves. After eating, she stood up and hesitated. For the first time, she did not leave immediately. She turned, walked toward the water station, then paused near the CEO's table. Her eyes met his again. "You're wondering?" she said quietly. "About what?" he asked. "Why I'm here," she replied. "And why I don't need more than this." He said nothing. She gave a small shrug. Food is easy. Being seen is harder, and she walked away. The CEO remained seated long after she left. That night, he reviewed old security logs. The girl appeared regularly across different locations in the city over several years: libraries, public lectures, shelters, open events. Always quiet, always unnoticed, always present, but never remembered clearly by anyone. She was hiding. But not because she was doing something wrong. She was hiding because she had learned how. The CEO realized something important then. The most invisible people were often the ones who understood the world best. They watched. They waited. They survived. And sometimes they chose free food, not because they were poor, but because it was the safest way to exist without questions. The next Friday, he decided he would speak to her, not as a CEO, but as someone ready to listen. The girl continued to come every Friday, and each time she became more noticeable to the CEO, not because of her clothes or her actions, but because of how she moved through the room. She was always careful, always calm, always aware. It was not the kind of attention-seeking behavior one might expect from someone trying to hide. She wanted to remain unnoticed, but she could not hide the way her mind worked. Volunteers began to talk quietly among themselves about her. "She's different," one said. "I've never met anyone who observes everything without speaking much," another added. "She never complains, never asks for money, never leaves a mess. She's polite, almost too polite." Their curiosity grew, but the rules were clear. No one asked too many questions. The CEO could not ignore her. He watched as she moved through the lunch hall, noting how she avoided stepping on anyone's toes, literally and figuratively. If someone spilled water, she instinctively moved to help without interrupting the flow of the volunteers. If 2 people argued quietly at a table, she listened without judgment, tilting her head ever so slightly, as though processing the emotions in the room. There was a kind of intelligence there that he could not place. One afternoon, a visiting scientist came to give a short talk about urban planning and environmental issues. People in the room asked questions, some simple, some complex. The girl, seated near the back, raised her hand lightly. When given the chance, she spoke clearly and accurately, explaining a subtle point about energy systems that most adults had missed. Her answer was concise, correct, and delivered without arrogance. The scientist nodded, surprised, and the room murmured quietly in appreciation. The CEO's curiosity turned into concern. This was not a normal girl. She spoke like an adult with years of knowledge, but she had no formal identification or background. She did not seem to belong anywhere in the city. She existed quietly, almost like a shadow, moving through the community, but never really part of it. Security footage began to reveal something even stranger. The girl did not simply walk around. She moved with a precision that no ordinary person could match. She avoided cameras when she did not need to be recorded, always choosing angles that kept her private. It was not clumsy. It was deliberate. Yet she never seemed to be sneaky for the sake of sneaking. It was as if she knew instinctively how to remain unseen, and respected the privacy of others at the same time. Volunteers noticed more subtle things, too. She would sometimes mimic the posture of a person who seemed nervous, helping them feel more comfortable without saying a word. She could sense tension and subtly change her movements to make the room calmer. When children were around, they seemed drawn to her, not because she sought attention, but because she radiated quiet safety. The CEO decided to observe her more closely. He tried small tests like changing the seating arrangement or placing a volunteer nearby to speak directly to her. Each time she adapted calmly, almost as if she had anticipated the change before it happened. Her intelligence and awareness were remarkable, but it was not just intellectual. She seemed emotionally tuned to the environment. One Friday, she arrived slightly later than usual. The CEO noticed that she carried a small notebook. She did not write openly in it, but occasionally paused and made a small mark. He wondered what she was recording. The notebook was old, frayed at the edges yet carefully kept. It was clear she valued it. Over the next few weeks, her behavior began to show a pattern that no one could ignore. She was learning, yes, but she was also teaching in a subtle way. By simply being present, she influenced how people acted around her. Volunteers began to move more carefully, noticing each other's needs more quickly. Regular guests adjusted their behavior to becoming slightly kinder, more patient. She did not speak much, but her presence changed the room. The CEO felt a growing sense of unease mixed with fascination. He realized she was hiding something significant. It was not just knowledge or skill. It was the way she existed among humans without fully being human herself. He had seen people like this before in stories, outsiders who adapt perfectly to survive, observing and learning while remaining invisible. But this girl was real, and he could see her in every detail, in every movement, and even in the quiet moments when she seemed to pause and consider the world. Then one afternoon, something unusual happened. A man approached her while she was waiting in line, clearly intending to start a conversation. The man was talkative and loud, but the girl stayed calm. She responded politely but minimally. Then, without raising her voice, she corrected a small error in the man's statement about a current news event. The correction was simple, factual, and precise, yet delivered with such calm authority that the man stopped mid-sentence. People around noticed, but the girl said nothing more. She moved to her seat and ate quietly, as if nothing had happened. The CEO watched in disbelief. This girl had knowledge far beyond her apparent age, yet she did not flaunt it. She used it only when necessary, carefully choosing her moments, blending observation with restraint. The CEO began to consider her perspective. Perhaps she was not trying to hide her knowledge. Perhaps she had learned that showing too much would be dangerous. Perhaps she understood the world in ways most adults never could, understanding the balance between visibility and safety, between speaking and staying silent. As weeks turned into months, the CEO's curiosity grew into a quiet determination. He wanted to understand her, not just for the unusual knowledge she displayed, but for the way she moved through the world with such care and awareness. She was an enigma, a puzzle that no one around her had noticed until now. Volunteers and guests continued to speculate. Who is she? They asked each other quietly. Where does she come from? Why does she stay so calm? No one had answers, and the girl never offered any. The CEO realized he needed to speak with her directly, not as a test, not as an interrogation, but as someone genuinely trying to understand a person who existed so differently from anyone else he had met. He wondered what she had endured to learn how to live among humans without anyone noticing her true nature. One Friday, when she arrived, he decided to act. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, he watched from a distance, noting every detail: how she entered, how she interacted, how she chose her seat, how she ate. He saw patterns that others missed. She always positioned herself to observe both the entrance and the room without being obvious. She adjusted her pace based on the crowd, never rushing, never slowing too much. When she finished eating, she moved toward the door. But instead of leaving immediately, she glanced at the CEO. Their eyes met for a brief moment. This time, there was no hesitation, only a quiet acknowledgement. It was as if she recognized him as someone different from the rest, someone who might understand. The CEO realized that the small details, the careful steps, the calm demeanor, the knowledge, the awareness were all clues to something much larger. She was hiding in plain sight, yes, but she was not afraid to be noticed by the right person. She had chosen to exist quietly, observing, learning, and surviving. But she had also chosen him, perhaps instinctively, as someone she could reveal herself to eventually. That night, the CEO could not sleep. He thought about the girl and what she represented. She was not just another person seeking help. She was someone extraordinary, someone who had adapted to survive in ways most people could not imagine. He realized that understanding her required patience, respect, and perhaps a willingness to see the world differently. By the next Friday, he had made up his mind. He would speak to her, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with curiosity, respect, and the hope of understanding the person who had quietly captured his attention for months. And so, the stage was set for the conversation that would reveal the truth about her. The truth she had kept hidden while living in plain sight among humans. The following Friday arrived, bright and crisp, with a gentle wind moving through the city streets. The lunch hall was busy as usual, filled with people from all walks of life. Volunteers were setting trays carefully, making sure that no one felt rushed or uncomfortable. The CEO arrived early, taking his usual spot near the side. But today was different. Today, he would not just watch. Today, he intended to speak. When the girl arrived, she moved as she always did, calm, deliberate, and quietly aware of everyone around her. She carried herself with the same measured steps, as if every motion was thought out in advance. But there was a small difference. Today, her eyes flicked toward the CEO and lingered slightly longer. It was subtle, but he noticed. As she reached the food table, the CEO approached. He walked slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hello?" he said softly. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and nodded politely. "Hi," she replied. Her voice was the same calm, clear tone that he had grown familiar with over the weeks. "I've been watching you," he began. He did not say it in an accusing way, only truthfully. "I noticed the way you move through this room. You see things most people miss." Her eyes widened slightly, but she did not look afraid. Instead, there was a calm understanding, almost as if she had been expecting someone to notice. "I watch," she said simply. "It's important." "Important?" He asked. "Yes," she replied. "To understand. To survive. To know who people are, not just what they say." She paused, then looked down at her tray. "Most people don't see the truth. They see what they want to see." The CEO was intrigued. He led her to a quieter corner of the room, away from the crowd. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Privately." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. Together, they walked to a small office at the back, one rarely used by staff. The door closed behind them, and the hum of the lunch hall faded away. For the first time, they were alone. "Why do you come here every week?" he asked. "You're not like the others. You don't ask for money, you don't rush, and you seem different." She looked at him carefully, her eyes steady. "I need food," she said simply, "but not the way people think. I'm not hungry for money or attention, just for what keeps me alive." "What do you mean?" the CEO asked. She sighed, a soft, almost musical sound. "I am not from here," she said finally. "Not from this world. I have learned to live among humans, to survive without being noticed. I observe, I learn, I adapt. That is how I have stayed safe." The CEO blinked. "You what?" "I am not human," she said. Her voice was calm, almost like stating a fact, not asking for belief. "I arrived here many years ago. I have learned your ways, your rules, your patterns. I do not want to hurt anyone. I only want to live quietly." He felt a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something he could not name. "All this time? You've been hiding?" "Yes," she said simply. "Hiding in plain sight? It is easier than running, easier than asking for trust. Humans notice, but only what they want to see. She paused, studying his face. You notice something different. That is why you called me here. The CEO nodded slowly. I wanted to understand. I still want to understand. She smiled faintly. Then listen. I have seen many things you cannot imagine. Other places, other beings, ways of thinking that are different. I have learned your languages, your habits, your ways of living. I blend, but I remember. I survive. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you might be able to help, she replied. You notice me. That means you are different from most. You see beyond appearances. I need someone who can understand without judging. The CEO realized then that he had indeed been different. He had not treated her like a curiosity, like a problem to solve. He had simply watched, observed, and tried to understand. Perhaps that made him the right person. I can help, he said slowly. But I need to know the truth. Everything. Why you came here. Why you hide. What you need. Very well. I will tell you what I can. But you must promise no fear, no anger. Only understanding. I promise, he said. She took a deep breath. I come from a world far from here. My home was destroyed long ago. Those who survived were scattered. I came to this planet because it was safe, quiet, and full of possibilities. I learned to live among humans without revealing myself. At first it was survival. Later, it became understanding. I study how humans live, how they think, how they care. I do not take more than I need. I only observe. The CEO listened, fascinated. The words were extraordinary, but the calm way she spoke made it feel real, grounded, and sincere. Do you have family? He asked carefully. Her face darkened slightly. No, they were lost. I am alone. That is why I must hide. That is why I must be careful. To trust is dangerous, but necessary if one wants connection. He nodded, feeling a deep empathy. You've been here for years, and no one suspected? Most people do not look carefully, she said. They see only what they expect. I am not invisible, but I am unnoticed. That is enough to survive. The CEO took a moment, trying to imagine the life she had led. A life of constant observation, careful steps, quiet meals, silent learning. It was lonely, but it was also filled with purpose. Why are you telling me now? He asked. Because you saw, she said simply. You noticed me. That changes everything. I can continue hiding, but you will always see me, even if others do not. It is time to decide, do you want to help, or do you turn away? I want to help, he said, without hesitation. She looked at him, almost smiling, though her expression was calm. Then we will begin carefully. There are things humans cannot know. There are ways of living that must remain private. But I can share what is necessary, and in return, you can offer protection and understanding. That is all I ask. The CEO leaned back in his chair, thinking, here was someone extraordinary, someone who had survived against impossible odds, someone who had lived in plain sight without causing harm, someone who understood the world differently from anyone he had ever met. And now she had chosen to trust him. I will protect you, he said finally, and I will listen. We will figure this out together, she nodded, a sense of relief in her eyes. That is all I need. You do not need to understand everything at once. Just patience and care. That is enough. For the first time, the CEO realized the true weight of the situation. This girl, this being, was extraordinary in every sense. Her calm, her intelligence, her observation, and her quiet strength were all remarkable. But more than that, she had survived, and she had chosen to trust him. The conversation ended there, but it was not really the end. It was the beginning of something new, a relationship built on understanding, respect, and careful trust. The CEO knew that the coming days would be filled with questions, discoveries, and challenges. But he also knew one important truth. Sometimes, the most extraordinary beings are those who live quietly, unnoticed, and choose the right moment to reveal themselves. As she left the office and returned to her usual seat for the last few minutes of the lunch hour, the CEO watched silently. She carried herself with the same careful, deliberate grace as always. But now, he saw more than just a quiet girl taking food. He saw someone who had lived a life of careful observation. Someone who had learned to survive in a world that would never understand her fully. And he felt a growing sense of responsibility. He had been chosen, in a way, to be her protector, her ally, and perhaps her only friend in a world that had never noticed her before. That Friday, the lunch hall returned to its usual rhythm, but for the CEO, nothing felt usual anymore. He had met someone extraordinary, and he knew that the next step understanding her life fully would change everything he thought he knew about survival, trust, and the quiet strength of beings who could hide in plain sight. The days after their first private conversation were filled with quiet observation and careful trust. The CEO began noticing more details about the girl that he had missed before. She moved through the city with a precision that seemed impossible for someone her age. Every step, every glance, every gesture was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. But what fascinated him most was how natural it all appeared. Nothing about her behavior seemed forced or unnatural. He began thinking about the weeks, months, and even years she had spent in hiding. How many times had she gone unnoticed? How many meals had she eaten quietly in corners, while the world ignored her? How many times had she observed humans, learned their habits, adapted, and survived? He realized that her life had been a careful balance between observation and avoidance. Every choice, every movement, every silence had been part of a survival strategy that most people could never imagine. One afternoon, he invited her again to his office, this time for a longer conversation. He wanted to understand more about her origins, about her past, and about the life she had built in secrecy. She entered quietly, her calm presence filling the room in a way that made him aware of how different she was from anyone he had ever known. "I want to understand more about you," he said gently. "About where you came from, why you are here, and what you need to feel safe." She nodded, settling into a chair with the same careful poise that had become familiar to him. "I will tell you what I can," she said. "But you must promise me that you will listen with patience. Some things are difficult for humans to comprehend. I do not expect complete understanding immediately. Only care and attention, I promise," he replied. She took a deep breath and began. "I come from a world far from this one. My home was once filled with life and beauty, but it was destroyed in a way that left few survivors. My people were forced to scatter. Some went to other planets, some to distant regions, and some came here. I was one of those who came to this world to survive." He listened intently, trying to imagine the life she described. A world destroyed, a people scattered, and a young being arriving on Earth with no one to trust and no one to guide her. It was unimaginable, yet he could see the truth in her eyes, the calm, quiet knowledge of someone who had lived through extraordinary hardship. "I had to learn quickly," she continued. "I had to understand humans, their habits, their emotions, their systems. I had to adapt without drawing attention to myself. I observed, memorized, and practiced. I learned to speak your languages, to move like you, to act like you. I could not afford mistakes. Mistakes could have been deadly." The CEO felt a growing admiration for her. This was not just survival. This was mastery. She had learned to live in a completely foreign world, blending in so seamlessly that even adults who prided themselves on awareness would never notice her. "For years," she said softly, "I lived quietly. I did small jobs. I took food from places where I could. I helped others when possible, but always carefully. I had to remain invisible. Not because I wanted to, but because it was necessary. Humans are curious, but not always kind when they see something they do not understand." He nodded, realizing that her calm demeanor, her careful movements, and her quiet observation were not merely habits, they were survival skills. "You have lived alone all this time?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Alone, but not without purpose. I learned, I observed, I survived. I grew stronger, more careful, more aware, and I learned patience. Patience is essential when you are different. Patience allows you to wait for the right moment, for the right person, for the right opportunity to be trusted. And now, he asked, why trust me? She looked at him steadily. Because you noticed me without fear or judgment. You saw something others do not see. That is rare. Most humans ignore what they do not understand. You asked questions, not to control me, but to understand me. That shows care. That shows awareness. That is why I am here speaking with you. The CEO felt a deep sense of responsibility. She had survived countless dangers, hidden from countless eyes, and now she had chosen him as someone worthy of her trust. He realized that protecting her would not be simple, but it was necessary. Tell me about your abilities, he said carefully. Not to exploit you, but so I can understand what makes you different. She paused, considering. I am not strong like a soldier, nor am I dangerous. My strength is observation and understanding. I can process information quickly, remember details accurately, and predict outcomes based on patterns. I can read emotions, anticipate reactions, and understand intentions. These skills help me survive. They help me blend. They allow me to move through your world without being harmed. He marveled at her clarity and honesty. She was not boasting. She was simply stating the truth. These abilities were remarkable, but they were used not for power, not for control, but for survival. And for learning, do you have weaknesses? He asked gently. Yes, she replied. I tire easily. I am vulnerable when I let my guard down. I am inexperienced in social connections because I avoided them for safety. Trust is difficult. Loneliness is constant. These are the challenges I face, not because I am weak, but because I am careful. Carelessness can be fatal. He understood then that her calm, precise behavior was not perfection, it was necessity. She had learned to exist in a world that could easily harm her if she revealed too much, if she moved too quickly, or if she trusted too easily. Every action was deliberate, every step measured, every silence calculated. You've lived here in plain sight for years, he said softly. Do people ever notice you? Do they ever try to help? Occasionally, she admitted. Some people are kind, some curious, some suspicious. But I never allowed myself to be fully known. Curiosity can be dangerous. It can expose you to those who wish to harm. I have learned to observe without being observed. That is the key to survival. The CEO realized that this girl had endured more than most adults could imagine. She had lived alone, hidden, constantly analyzing, constantly aware, and yet she had not given up. She had not become bitter or angry. Instead, she had remained patient, careful, and observant. She had survived. I want to help you, he said finally. I want to protect you and give you a chance to live without fear. I cannot imagine what it has been like for you, but I want to make it safer. Can you allow me to do that? She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, she said. But carefully. Protection is helpful only if it does not compromise my safety. Trust must be earned slowly, over time. That is how I have survived. That is how I will continue to survive. He agreed. They spoke for hours, carefully discussing what could be done to provide safety, how she could move through the world with more freedom, and how he could offer support without exposing her to danger. It was a delicate balance, but one they were both willing to attempt. By the end of the day, the CEO realized how extraordinary she truly was. She was not just a survivor. She was a teacher of patience, observation, and careful trust. She had endured loneliness, hidden in plain sight, and mastered the art of existing in a world that was never made for her. And now, she had chosen to allow him into her life, to offer understanding and protection. As she left his office and returned to her usual seat for the last moments of lunch, the CEO felt a mix of awe and responsibility. He had met someone who had survived unimaginable challenges with grace and intelligence. He had met someone extraordinary, and he knew that the coming days, weeks, and months would be filled with discoveries about her life, her past. In her remarkable abilities, he also understood something else. that extraordinary beings often survive not by fighting or showing power, but by blending in, observing carefully, and revealing themselves only to those they trust. And now, he had been chosen to be one of those trusted few. From that day forward, their relationship began to grow, built on patience, understanding, and careful trust. She remained cautious, but he remained committed. And together, they began navigating a new reality, one in which extraordinary survival, quiet intelligence, and human kindness intersected in ways neither had expected, yet both would come to rely on. The weeks after their conversation passed quietly, but with a growing sense of connection. The CEO and the girl continued meeting in the office, talking in careful, measured ways. Every conversation revealed more about her life, her experiences, and the extraordinary patience it had taken for her to survive in a world that was never meant for her. Yet she remained cautious. She moved through the city as before, calm, precise, careful, always aware, always blending in. But now, there was trust. And trust for her was rare and precious. The CEO realized that protecting her would require more than words. It would require action, planning, and thoughtfulness. He began quietly creating a safety plan, small steps that could provide her more security without drawing attention. He arranged for discreet housing support, medical assistance if needed, and access to resources that would allow her to live without fear of exposure. Every plan was made with her consent. Every step carefully explained and discussed. She watched him with quiet appreciation. "You are patient," she said one afternoon. "Most humans would rush. Most humans would demand answers or try to control. You wait. You observe. You care?" "I've learned from you," he replied honestly. "You've shown me how to see without rushing, how to understand without judgment. You've survived in ways I cannot imagine. I can offer you help, but I cannot fully know your world. I can only try to understand." Her eyes softened. "That is enough," she said. "I do not ask for more." Despite her calm words, he could sense the weight she carried. The years of hiding, the constant vigilance, the loneliness, it all lingered in the quiet moments, in the way she sometimes paused, staring at the world, as if calculating its dangers and possibilities. He wanted to lift that weight, to give her freedom, but he also knew it could not be done all at once. Trust had to grow slowly, carefully. One Friday, he invited her to walk with him outside, a small trip away from the crowded lunch hall. The city moved around them, busy and unaware. She walked beside him, matching his pace, careful not to draw attention. "Do you ever feel afraid?" he asked quietly, glancing at her. "Always," she replied. "But fear is different from danger. Fear is internal. Danger is external. I live with both every day. I have learned to manage them. That is how I survive." He nodded, understanding that her calmness was not the absence of fear. It was mastery over it. It was control, discipline, and awareness, honed through years of necessity. "You've been here for years alone," he said softly, "never revealing yourself, never asking for help. That must have been hard." "It was necessary," she said simply. "Loneliness is difficult, but trust can be fatal if given too quickly. I have learned patience. I have learned observation. I have learned who I can allow to see me and who must remain unaware. You are one of the few who have earned that trust." He felt the weight of her words. He realized that she had lived not just in hiding, but in constant calculation, balancing every move with survival in mind. Yet she had chosen to share her life with him. That choice, he understood, was profound. "Then let us take the next step," he said carefully. "I want to offer you a chance to live more freely. You have survived through hiding. You have adapted perfectly. But perhaps you do not need to hide as much anymore. I can protect you, provide support, and help you exist in this world safely." She studied him silently, considering. "It is dangerous," she said finally. "Exposure can bring curiosity. Curiosity can bring harm. But I see your sincerity. I feel your care. Perhaps the time has come to trust more fully." He nodded. "We will take it slowly. step by step. No sudden moves. Only when you are ready. Over the next few days, small changes began. She was allowed to visit places with less risk, meet a few trusted individuals who could provide support, and have access to resources she had never dared approach before. Every step was calculated, every action deliberate, every trust earned carefully. Yet, with each small change, her demeanor softened slightly. She moved with a little more ease, her eyes holding less constant vigilance. One evening, they sat together quietly, reviewing the plans. "You are helping me in ways I never imagined," she said softly. "You are giving me safety, and that is rare. Few humans would do so. Most would fear difference. Most would react with suspicion." "I only want to help," he replied. "You have survived extraordinary odds. You deserve peace, freedom, and care. I will do everything I can to give you that." She nodded, a faint smile forming. "That is more than enough." Over time, she began to share more of her world with him. Small stories about her home, memories of her people, lessons learned from observing humans, insights into survival, and understanding of emotions. Each story revealed intelligence, patience, and experience far beyond her apparent age. She taught him humility, patience, and the value of quiet observation. And in return, he offered protection, support, and a chance at safety, a combination she had never known before. One day he asked, "Do you ever wish to live openly without hiding?" She hesitated, then replied slowly, "Yes, but only if it is safe. Exposure can be dangerous, but with care, with planning, with understanding, perhaps it can be possible." And so, together, they began building a life where she could exist with less fear. Carefully, deliberately, and with constant attention to safety, she learned to trust the world a little more. She remained cautious, but no longer completely alone. She could share her thoughts, her knowledge, and her presence with someone who truly cared. The CEO realized that the most extraordinary beings often survive not by strength or aggression, but by patience, observation, and careful trust. She had lived for years in plain sight, unnoticed, blending in, learning, surviving. Yet she had chosen to reveal herself to him. That trust was a gift he could never take lightly. Weeks turned into months, and her life became more stable. She still moved carefully, still observed constantly, but she now had freedom she had never known. She could eat without fear, speak without hiding, and exist with someone who would protect her. The weight of loneliness lifted slightly, replaced by cautious hope. The CEO felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had been entrusted with her life, her secrets, and her trust. And in return, she had given him insight into survival, patience, intelligence, and the quiet strength of beings who live carefully, unnoticed but profoundly aware. In the end, the girl was no longer just a visitor at the lunch hall. She became a symbol of resilience, patience, and extraordinary survival. And the CEO realized that sometimes those who appear most ordinary are the ones carrying the greatest wisdom, strength, and courage. Together, they navigated a new reality, one where extraordinary survival met human care, trust, and understanding. And in that careful balance, both found something they had never expected: hope, companionship, and the possibility of living fully, without fear, in a world that had once seemed too dangerous for her to reveal herself. And so, the girl who had once said, "Just here for the free food," found not only nourishment but safety, friendship, and the chance to live openly in the world she had quietly observed for so many years. The CEO learned that true trust and understanding could change lives, and that sometimes extraordinary beings survive by appearing ordinary until the right moment and the right person arrives to see them.